Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is our first New Year meeting of Donors Forum for 2023-2024. It coincides with UN Week, which is very important not only to New York, but also to our guest and our conversation today. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a moment, but let me just lay this out for you. As I mentioned before, my name is Doug White, and I moderate this on a monthly basis, and we talk to people who are interesting and interested on the issue of philanthropy and the world of nonprofits. We take this time once a month to discuss issues that are important to all of us and yet don't have any clear-cut resolutions. And today's topic is going to be a perfect example of that. To get right into it, our guest today is Oleksandr Zavalov, and he goes by Alex, just for all of you who want to address him. When we have this conversation, it's usually that I begin with a few questions, but I also want to invite anyone in this room in person or online to send me a question. In the example of people in the Zoom room, please type it out on the chat and I'll get to it via Deborah. As I mentioned, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to begin, because it is a topical moment, with a quote that came out of the United Nations yesterday. President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking before the UN Security Council session yesterday, presented his country's 10-point plan to end the war with Russia. He criticized the UN for not fulfilling its role in solving world conflicts. And he also called for Moscow to be stripped of its veto power in the council. He said, "It is impossible to stop the war because all actions are vetoed by the aggression." That sets the stage for what he said to the United Nations. As you probably know, he's in Washington today visiting the White House, the Pentagon, and Congress. And he's trying to do a lot of work to get support from the United States for his cause in Ukraine. Well, today we have someone who is from Ukraine and is doing work for Ukrainian children. And on that note, I'd like to say good morning and welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
How are you feeling today?
Good.
Alex came down by the
Dartmouth coach bus from Hanover, from Dartmouth College.
We will get to your background in just a moment, but just based on what I said about your president's or Ukraine's president's comments yesterday, do you have any thoughts or reactions to that?
Yeah, definitely. So it is definitely a very difficult time for all Ukrainians. And while Ukrainians do have a different view on the current political situation, I'm kind of like more on the moderate side, but I do think that there should be more measures taking place, like in the legislative bodies and in international institutions, to kind of like stop aggression and mitigate war efforts, because children are dying every day in Ukraine, like people are dying, and there should be more done to stop that or mitigate the process.
When you say you're more modest or you're more conservative, moderate, yes. What specifically do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of people are kind of like more radical as to like kind of like more like I don't really like radicalism as to like kind of like killing more people, and I'm really like against like any war personally, but I do realize that what's going on is important because it's a fight for democracy and fight for freedoms of the Ukrainian people. So I'm just kind of like more on the moderate side of the political spectrum, if that makes sense.
Do you agree with what the Ukrainian president said yesterday?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, there should be more security measures taking place, and there should be more legislative acts and maybe some international initiatives through these international institutions taking place to mitigate the war effort.
You're a very young man. You were born in Ukraine after the Soviet Union disintegrated, but while you were there, when you were born, Russia had quite an influence in Ukraine. Can you tell us what it was like as a child when you were in Ukraine?
Yeah, definitely. So with my family, we lived in Kiev and in the city, which is the capital of Ukraine. And basically, we moved to the United States when I was in my first grade. but we still like came back there for the summer, so I did have quite a few experiences there, even like after we moved. But Russia definitely did have a lot of influence, and I would argue even still does have a lot of influence in Ukraine, because a lot of Ukrainians still speak Russian, and Russian is kind of like a second language in Ukraine, even though it's not official. It's kind of like French, maybe in some regions of Canada, and there are particularly some regions in Ukraine where there are a lot of Russian-speaking population, and so there is a lot of that influence. But speaking on the political side, I know a lot of MPs in Ukraine because I have had a lot of interaction with Ukrainian parliament through my work with my nonprofit. And there was definitely a lot of people in the government who were directly Russian agents. And that really helped Russia advance in the first days of the war. But what really helped Ukraine is the mobilization efforts, and how kind of like Ukraine maybe like benefited from some kind of like decentralization initiatives that there weren't like that many taking place, but still like people and community groups were able to group together and help stop this, to catalyze this process.
When you were growing up, you kept going back, you said in the summer times. Did you feel this influence from Russia when you were there?
Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, a lot of Ukrainian families do speak still like Russian at homes and like at work. And obviously, a lot of like Russian people were actually leading many Ukrainian businesses, and a lot of Russian oligarchs had a stake in Ukrainian business. So, like, I mean, Ukrainian-Russian relations were very overlapped for many years.
Why did your parents want to leave Ukraine when they did?
Yeah, so my parents left Ukraine because my parents actually have a scientific background in physics, and they went to New York to do research, and then we stayed, and we lived in Canada, we lived in Los Angeles, California, and now we live like near Philadelphia, but my dad now works in pharmaceutical business.
And you've been here then for how long?
For about 10 years.
And then you started looking at colleges.
Yeah.
What were you looking for when you wanted to see a college?
Yeah, so I really wanted liberal arts education, and I wanted like an Ivy League college. Actually, I submitted 40 college applications.
How many? 40?
40.
40, okay. Is that typical these days? I don't know, I'm old.
It's getting more typical, I
Okay.
guess.
Anyway, go ahead, I interrupted you.
Yeah, so I really like Dartmouth because of its liberal arts education, and it's like very welcoming community. And one of the things I was shocked at when I kind of like came to Dartmouth is how welcoming everyone was, because like, I mean, like we are from a more like suburban area, and like people don't really like kind of like aren't like don't like dedicate that much time to you, and like people in Hanover would just stop by like on the street and talk for you for like half an hour, and that was kind of like what was surprising.
A pleasant surprise, I take it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you like Hanover, you're enjoying
Yeah.
college, but you are in college right now,
I am. I'm a class of 26.
which means you're a sophomore,
Yep.
and you're doing well in your studies?
Yeah.
And the reason I asked that, not because I don't think you're really smart, but because you're also carrying the equivalent of a full-time job.
Yep.
So now we're gonna turn the corner and ask you specifically about Future Via.
Yeah.
What is Future Via?
Yeah, so I founded Future Via right during orientation week at Dartmouth because we didn't really have anything to do, and I really
I'm
had
sorry, you said you didn't have anything to do during,
orientation week.
you weren't being oriented?
I guess not.
Or you already knew everything already?
Well, I did knew because I came for like a campus visit and stuff like that. Yeah, in terms of my nonprofit, so I really had this idea for a long time to help Ukraine. And I was actually inspired by two Harvard students who founded this initiative, Break Time. And so I just saw how these young people were able to make such a big difference on the lives of thousands of people. And that's kind of like what I wanted to do. And when I saw the Russian aggression and how children were impacted, I wanted to fill this unique gap in philanthropy. Because even now, I talk to people and they still don't see specifically education as the highest priority right now. I spoke to the Minister of Education of Ukraine, I spoke to the Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, and a lot of them still don't like see education as a priority, and that's very concerning because Ukrainian children were impacted first by COVID, and then by the war, many schools were destroyed. A lot of people were internally displaced, and a lot of schools are overloaded. And so there is really a risk of a whole generation being uneducated. And that's something we want to mitigate with this nonprofit. So our initial idea was going to be rebuild schools. And then as we evolved over the past year, we do have quite a bit of projects, and I can discuss it later.
Sure, but let's get to the founding of Future VIA. You said the word "we" a few times.
Who else is in this with you?
Yeah, so I kind of like submitted all the legal paperwork and stuff like that during my orientation week. And then I got my friend Jack Grodnick involved in this. He was involved in this for almost its whole period. So he's the co-founder of this. And because he really helped me from the very beginning with all the stages of this. But we do have a lot of high-profile people involved in this. We have a member of parliament, Yuri Kamalchuk. He is our partner, and he's a member of parliament from Zelensky's party, Servant of the People. And so we did quite a few projects with him, helping orphanages, delivering school supplies to first graders, and really delivering this humanitarian relief to the families who were impacted by the war. And also there's Miss Ukraine involved in this, Julia, and she also helped us a lot. And now with her, we're working on one initiative by the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine. And so what we hope to do is organize this tour with a lot of celebrities in December. It's going to be in 11 cities in North America and also in several European countries. And President Zelensky is most likely going to come to DC, to the Kennedy Center on December 6th. So in any case, I want to invite all of you to come. And there's going to be a Ukrainian kind of like celebrity performance there with a very famous Ukrainian rapper, Kalush, and several other Ukrainian pop stars, as well as American celebrities, Leonardo DiCaprio. We invited him, and we invited some other Hollywood celebrities. So we're still finalizing that list, but also there is going to be an award ceremony with Zelensky to give highest awards from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine to really all these exceptional people who were supporting Ukraine in these difficult times.
Anybody have a question or a comment right now? Keep in mind that you are welcome to ask or anything you'd like as we go forward.
I think I wanted to add something Alex said at the beginning, and speaking about Zelensky's speech, President Biden had said something pretty cogent in addressing the assembly. If the UN can't do something in this case, what the heck is it here for? That was the original charter. So it's very frustrating for the future of the UN if they can't be effective.
You ever thought about that?
Well, I mean, like as we discussed in some of my classes and my seminars, these international institutions are overloaded and they're sometimes not very effective at tackling some issues. And there does need to be a little bit more kind of like transparency into the work of them, I do think. And yeah, there should be some reform in that.
And I have two questions.
Yes.
So my first question is about your specific work. You mentioned at first you were going to focus on rebuilding schools, but obviously, unfortunately, we know there's still quite a bit of destruction happening. So have you refocused that, or are you still working on that as one of your initiatives?
Yeah, we're still working on that as one of our initiatives, but I was just going to say that we evolved and kind of like developed new projects and other priorities as well in the sphere of education and helping children. But we are in close touch with the mayor of Chernihiv. So Chernihiv kind of like was destroyed almost completely, and a lot of schools were almost entirely ruined there. But it wasn't like on the direct path of invasion to Kiev. So we did kind of like decide initially to focus on Chernihiv region to help rebuild some schools there.
Then, if I may, if
Sure.
nobody else has a
There's another from the Zoom, but please go ahead.
So this one's a little more provocative, and I'm sorry for it. But so I think pre-COVID, but it might have been during. I think it was pre-COVID. My family received some communications from friends in Ukraine, and the note I thought was fake at first because it seemed very like World War II-ish. About energy, about the electricity being managed, being cut off, and people literally being taken out in the woods and being shot. So it feels like there has been a lot of groundwork in Ukraine, as you maybe allude to, before the war that's led up to this, and that was very well known. So I just wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah. So Russians are kind of like intimidating people, and one of their priorities, I think, is to kind of like intimidate the daily lives of Ukrainians, and obviously shutting down electricity, and shutting down like the internet in some regions, because I've spoke to a lot of people in Ukraine, and there are some like issues with the internet sometimes and stuff like that. And that does prevent people from like doing their work, because like a lot of people also work remotely and stuff like that. But yeah, also a lot of people just get killed or being like unable kind of like to satisfy their basic needs because of that. But I do want to also highlight the important work of all the volunteers who are working on the ground in Ukraine to mitigate that process. And they've been very responsive in recent time. And so they really helped to kind of like mitigate this as smoothly as possible.
Thank you. Lawrence Burek has a comment and a question. That was a cue for you to ask it.
Okay. Was that the cue? Okay. Good morning, Alexander. My question is, for the most part, American global media outlets are emphasizing the war efforts, destruction and loss of life in Ukraine. The organization is concerned about children, as I understand it. So do you think do you feel there's enough being done about the youth en masse who've been kidnapped as part of the Russian occupation? Would some of your initiatives involve efforts for repatriation of these children back to Ukraine?
Yeah. So like obviously rebuilding schools is kind of like a direct kind of like, if we rebuild those schools, a lot of people would come back to Ukraine, because a lot of Ukrainian refugees are now in Poland. But in terms of people getting kidnapped, there are on the eastern part of Ukraine, there were a lot of people who were forcibly relocated to Russia, and kind of like the Russia moved their own population in those regions to say that there are like a more pro-Russian sentiment going on there. So that was an initiative of the Russian people initially.
I was actually talking about the 10,000 children that were, kidnapped and taken away from their parents. It was just mentioned, I think your President Zelensky mentioned it in the UN. That's part of the definition of the genocide activity. And then being told to hate their homeland and to basically, So I guess I'm saying, do you think enough is being done to counter that?
Yeah. So I do think there should be, there are a lot of initiatives being done and a lot of work in that place, but I do think there should be more attention given to Ukrainian children, because I feel like a lot of initiatives are focused like on the war itself, like the army, and obviously that's a really big priority right now. But we also have to remember the needs of the children and of the families of the soldiers and of all the other people who were impacted by the war.
Thank you, Larry. Anything else right now? I had another question that occurs to me as a result of these last couple of exchanges here. You began Future Via as an organization last year, is that correct? A year ago, a little over a year ago?
Yeah.
I guess it's a little too soon to make this sound modest, but it'll sound more harsh. What have you done? What have you accomplished?
Yeah. So I accomplished meeting a lot of people. First of all, I'm now in contact with almost half of the Ukrainian parliament. So we helped a lot with humanitarian relief. Our first project was actually delivering Christmas presents and supplies to children in Chernihiv with the mayor of Chernihiv. So we did like the event for the whole city. And then we delivered supplies to orphanages with MP Kamalchuk, as I previously mentioned. We delivered like presents, we delivered supplies, we delivered school supplies for the first graders, because a lot of children lost their families and otherwise wouldn't have these school supplies to start their educational journey, and that we decided to step in and make a difference with that.
Where does the money come from to pay for all this?
Yeah, so we have a lot of sponsors, and I'm very grateful to the Dartmouth Network and a lot of people who kind of like are very sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause and really helping the Ukrainian cause. And I did talk to several billionaires who were connected to Ukraine. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention their names, so I won't do that. But yeah.
Well, but the point, I think what Stanley is getting at though is where, okay, you know people.
Yeah.
Do you call them up and say, I need money? Do you call them up and say you'd like them to buy supplies? What's the process?
Yeah, so we never ask people directly for money. We always, at all of our events, at my presentations at the Rotary Club. And I think I can say that because John Hipko, the CEO of Rotary International, he recorded a video in our support. So if you go on our website at futurevia.org and on our YouTube channel, there is that video. And so, yeah, I've been welcomed by several Rotary clubs and did presentations there and just kind of like talked about our work. But most of our fundraising is being done through our website. So we kind of like use PayPal processing system and stuff like that. But we did also receive like checks and like wire transfers. But like we always kind of like, I always reach out to new people, just kind of like asking to record a meeting, to set up a meeting to kind of like discuss our priorities to support Ukraine.
And I'd imagine if you're going to be in the business of raising money for the organization, you might want to learn how to ask for money.
Yeah.
Don't be shy. You can only be told no, that's the worst. And sometimes you'll be told yes, and sometimes you'll be told later. And sometimes no doesn't mean no, so it's gotta be an ongoing process.
Yeah.
But on a serious note, well, that was serious, but a more serious note, to Stanley's point, what kind of budget are you thinking about? What do you need right now? What's
Yeah.
your vision for the next year or two?
So our goal like this year is to raise $150 million. So first of all, we need $2 million for this tour with the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine to kind of like rent all these hotels and stuff like that. I've been in touch with the CEO of Marriott Hotels, kind of like, so we did get a lot of discount on many hotel rooms because 60 people are coming to that tour. And that's going to be like the largest really tour and philanthropic tour for Ukraine in kind of like the history. And we launched a $1 billion campaign for that. So that's what we hope to accomplish with that tour. And there are going to be about like 10 to 20 billionaires. A lot of them have personal connections to Ukraine. So I do hope to get more people involved in this to resonate with the Ukrainian cause.
And what is your current budget? Sorry.
Yeah. So we need, as I mentioned, 100 million to even more like 150 to 200 million to build a business school in Ukraine. And I had a lot of discussions with some people who, a lot of people don't think that this is a priority. And we in fact do think that this is a priority and should be done right now because Ukraine really, I think, starts to emerge on this process of rebuilding Ukraine. And obviously Ukraine would need a lot of business leaders. And kind of like to step back from that for a second, I just want to give some background as to the situation on education in Ukraine. So unfortunately, Ukraine is still kind of like, it has these overshadow like from the Soviet Union, and a lot of its like higher education is kind of like based on the Soviet system. So a lot of bright Ukrainian students, they go to Ivy League schools, they go to like European universities, American universities, and we do want them to stay in Ukraine. And so we plan to invite Harvard professors from Tuck, from other Ivy schools. And we hope to build that in the western part of Ukraine near Lviv or in the mountains, like with the ski resorts. And that's gonna have like a very similar location to Dartmouth College. And so we do think that we can start building this like either this or next year and really have a huge impact because it's going to be like the best business school in Ukraine. And it's really going to help kind of like retain those people who can make a lasting impact on Ukrainian business and the rebuilding process.
You have a video on your website of your vision for the business school.
We do.
And you think it's going to cost how much to put together and then endow?
100 million to build, and we also think need 100 million to endow this to ensure that we set up a good legacy for many years to come.
I don't know about everyone else here, but I'm a little surprised to hear a kid who's not drinking age. And after 1 year of having established a program that's going on to benefit a country that may not exist in a few years, talking about raising $100 and $200 million within the next year or two. Do you feel that's a little bit of a jump, or how do you feel confident about that?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to address the country not being existent anymore. I do think that Ukraine will be in existence, and there might be some territorial concessions in Ukraine on the eastern front, but I do think Ukraine will retain most of its western territories, including Lviv, because like that's the region of Ukraine where all the people speak Ukrainian. So it's going to be very hard to implement a Russian rule over that territory. So we do feel confident that that territory is going to remain safe and is safe to start building and establishing this business school for years to come. So that's on that. And on the other hand, yeah, it is definitely difficult for me to kind of like convince some people to kind of like invest in our initiatives because of my age and stuff like that. But I do want to reinforce that we have support of Zelensky, of the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. I am in contact with Google on delivering 200,000 Chromebooks to Ukrainian children, which is our next project. And our end hope is to deliver about 500,000 Chromebooks, but we do need 150 million for that, even with the discounted rate by Google, and in partnership with the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. So we are in the process of negotiating that and kind of establishing a deal for that. But our another initiative is a private equity company, which is probably going to be like a separate legal entity, a sub-entity within Future VM. And it's going to be to help rebuild Ukraine. And as I just want to mention that all of our activities align with our mission to help Ukraine and help with the education in Ukraine, to help the children of Ukraine and to help their families. And to do that effectively, we need this private equity company as well to attract investors to invest in our initiative on helping rebuild Ukraine. And we hope to make this the mainstream, official initiative and the main initiative on investing in Ukraine, because we're going to hire the best people to run this on the financial side. But we do have a overwhelming support of 40 parliament members right now. So we have the support in Ukraine necessarily to implement any size projects. And I do have quite a good network. So I do think we are moving in the right direction.
Well, I have every confidence, although it does sound very, very ambitious. And many people, especially those of a certain age like mine, are going to say, right, you're just a young man and you're just dreaming. But the dreams can turn into reality with the right kind of work and intellect. You seem to have that in you. And I wanted to also just come back to this other assumption that I had in my question, which was provocative on purpose too. So if you think, Heather, that you asked something provocative, here we go. You think that Ukraine will be around?
Yeah, I do think at least most of it, and especially the western part of Ukraine. As I mentioned, there might be some territorial concession on the eastern front to help end the war. And one potential scenario of ending the war could be due to the instabilities in Chechnya and Russia, because if there's going to be some leadership change due to illness of the leadership, which there are some stories that could happen, that could significantly destabilize the situation within Russia, and Russia would have to direct troops into that region, and so there might be some work done in that, and that might help with ending the war and kind of stabilizing this. And I do kind of see a more of stabilization, if that makes sense, of the situation on the front. Well, it's kind of hard to say that, but I do think that Ukraine made a lot of progress, but right now the situation is kind of in a gridlock, and we do need an external factor to step in, like the destabilization within Russia, or something from maybe some international institutions, even though they weren't very effective, to really kind of give a certain push to the situation to kind of maybe help move it towards the ending process.
Who would know that as a young man in college, you're starting a nonprofit to help children, and you're so enmeshed in military strategy and foreign diplomacy. Did you have your hand up there, Stanley?
Yes, it was on that very point, Doug. It seems to me that you're better off doing what you do well, helping kids and education, and don't get enmeshed and immersed in the strategy of how we end the war. It's very important, it's vitally important, but that's not your jurisdiction. You're doing something that is absolutely beneficial, and you'll see good results.
Yeah.
And on that point, there is someone who has this question, who asks me to say this to you. I see that priorities are safe, that his priorities are safe. Safety, food, and educational materials. How about children's mental health? This is my question. What about children's mental health?
Yeah, so one of our priorities in the tour was to help with the comprehensive rehabilitation of the families of soldiers. And obviously there are a lot of mental health issues in Ukraine because like if like their like parents are being killed on the front and they're going on through all these hardships, there are a lot of problems going on right now with that. And I do think there should be more being done onto that. So we plan to step into that a little bit more with this tour. And we hope to help with the medical situation in Ukraine as well. And that kind of like smoothly transitions into another projects. We're thinking of starting as like a medical, kind of like a platform in Ukraine. And so Ukraine really needs some reform being done in the medical system, especially like in America, like there is like these like codes, like where like you go to the hospital and there's these encrypted codes, which at the end help pharmaceutical companies do clinical trials here. But there are a lot of clinical trials being done in Ukraine by America's pharmaceutical companies, and they are facing a lot of challenges because there isn't enough infrastructure in Ukraine to help develop these drugs, and there isn't enough data on the needs and also on like the illnesses and on the patient data. And we kind of like hope to build a application platform that's going to serve as an infrastructure, working directly with the government of Ukraine, with the pharmaceutical companies, and with medical institutions in Ukraine to help establish that infrastructure that is going to provide safe and encrypted data that will help save many more lives and develop like cancer drugs and drugs for many other issues.
On your, yes, go ahead.
Going back to the big initiative around the business school, I went to business school in the US. I know the value, I understand the importance. There are hundreds of millions of dollars are being now allocated through the big funders, the USA, the UK aid, all of these. Are you in coordination with them? Is this part of like a kind of like a multilateral, because I know they have a lot of effort underway and a lot of intention, effectively or not, that can be discussed.
Yeah. So I'm actually in touch with Natalie Yaresko, who was the former Minister of Finance of Ukraine, and she was actually the president of the Western Needs Fund, and that's funded directly by USAID and the American government. And we did reach out to that fund and spoke to people there. So they kind of like said that some of our initiatives are not like in their priorities, but one of their priorities is kind of like help like with the business in Ukraine. So we kind of like hope to maybe get them involved in our private equity business.
But there are like hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts like rolling in and out. In a way, if some of them are on the educational path already, it might be almost like an easier path to money than donation. So.
Yeah, obviously we planned because like most of the support is actually through the government. So we hope to attract more government support with our tour, first of all, and to not just like the private sponsors, but also the governments. And we kind of like maybe need to figure out a way to honor that, maybe at the award ceremony as well, with maybe like the leaders of like specific like countries, not only just the US, but European countries who are stepping in to help Ukraine.
On your website, you have a story where you say you saved a life.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Yeah. So like about a week ago, one lady reached out to me, and she said that like her child is gonna die because he needs this operation, which is very costly and much above like her savings or her budget. And so we decided to step in and help pay that. And so now the child he's 10 years old and he's going comprehensive rehabilitation process after the operation. And getting down this operation that's going to save his life.
I was curious about the size of your team, because obviously you're in school full-time, and the amount of money you're raising and the size and scope of the projects you're undertaking. Do you have a professional team that's working with you? Is it all students? I'd love to hear like how many people are sort of involved in the administration of the efforts.
So in our direct administration, we have about 10 people, and we do have a very influential person, the Ukrainian MP Yuri Kamalchuk, and he's our partner for our initiatives in Ukraine. We're also working in very close contact with a Ukrainian kind of like celebrity politician, Oleksandr, and he has these 26 Honchenko centers. And so we just signed yesterday a partnership with centers, which are volunteer hubs, and we are implementing a soft skills program in all of his centers. So we are funding that directly and kind of like developing that program. So one person, Tanya, I want to acknowledge her efforts on developing this program, because really this is very important for the children, maybe even for their mental health as well, to kind of like be able to ask for help, but also to be able to connect better. But we do have a lot of people who are unofficially helping us, like Natalie Yaresko, who's very influential in the Ukrainian sphere. And all these parliament members, 3 of them are directly on our website, but 40 of them are in my contacts, and I'm reaching out to them frequently for help with this, with like different issues, like legal issues and stuff like that.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, please, no, you're probably asking the same question.
Yeah, no, you go, you.
I was just gonna say, I just think, I know nonprofit management, and there's just lots of like, legal things and the 990 tax forms and all of that. There's gotta be, like, do you have a back office? I meant sort of more employees, less than partners on it.
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned, we have this 10-person administrative team, but we also do have one person who's on our board, Jeff Morris. He's the Dartmouth 75 alum and the president of the Wisconsin and Dartmouth Alumni Association. So he helped us with some legal issues on the American side. And through the MP Kamalchuk, our Ukrainian partner and a member of our team, I want to say that as well, we were able to resolve some legal issues like in Ukraine in terms of like forming stuff. And yeah, because I've talked to like many people, and they said like, well, even about that, like other initiatives, like, well, what you're trying to do is international, and like they somehow see that as like somehow more difficult, and I don't see like why that's like more difficult, because we can just like send a wire transfer to our partners in Ukraine who are like verified, because we did a lot of projects through them, and they will help us very quickly implement any initiatives. Like we were told it wasn't possible to deliver like school supplies within 24 hours to hundreds of children in Ukraine, and we were able to accomplish that.
Yes.
A funny observation. Are you old enough to affirm a wire transfer?
I am, yeah.
That's a good
Did
question.
everybody hear the question?
Your observation.
The question was, are you old enough to confirm a wire transfer?
Right.
I love it. And you are.
I am, and I'm old enough to own a corporation, so a Future Via is legally registered as a Pennsylvania nonprofit corporation.
I just wanted to point out, Stanley, I really appreciated your comment, and that was my initial reaction. But as I thought about it in this meeting, I went back to notes from Art Taylor in February of 2019 with this roundtable, and he made a very strong impression on me. And the biggest impression from that meeting was that nonprofits are typically not bold enough. And I would say to you, don't listen to Stanley and me in our first reactions. Be bold and be boldly nice. Don't limit yourself. And I think that's what Art Taylor of Better Business Bureau Wise Giving Alliance would say.
Art Taylor from the Better Business
Yeah.
Bureau was a great guest. You're absolutely correct. Would you say be bold and be boldly nice, or nicely bold, or whatever? I think we've got that right here, but what do you have to say to that? Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely, because what we're doing is really raising awareness about Ukraine and kind of like maybe informing people about the needs people didn't kind of like thought about before, because like when people think of the needs of Ukrainian people, everyone thinks about the army and about the war effort, but people do forget about all the issues that are connected to that in the process and need to be resolved at this very moment.
But I was gonna ask you, before, if you can just not think about the war right now, and I know that's like asking Mrs. Lincoln how the play went. But if you can just think that way for a moment, let's acknowledge, or let me ask you, if you agree, that Ukraine had its problems beforehand from a civil society perspective. Do you feel that the nonprofit world in Ukraine is ready for you? Can it absorb what you're doing in a clean and free of skimming off the top for some officials? Is the environment there for you to succeed?
Yeah, so we're working with people who are our long-term partners and who are verified, so we kind of like trust them, and we know that they're not corrupt, especially people like Oleksandr or Yuri Tomolchuk, these two MPs. So we are confident in them, and that was proven with a lot of the wire transfers we sent them, and about the impact they showed to us. With like direct reports. So we do ask all of our partners to give us a very detailed financial report on all the projects. So we do keep control over that. But in terms of like the philanthropy in Ukraine, if we don't look at like corruption, if maybe that was your question, but just like on philanthropy within Ukraine, there haven't really been this kind of like very developed and smooth process for philanthropy within Ukraine. Like this whole process of many alums like at Dartmouth giving back to the institution hasn't really been developed, and you can't really, I think, legally even like give a donation because a lot of schools are funded directly by the government. So a lot of these like oligarchs or very kind of like influential alums of these colleges, and there are quite a few. They really don't have this opportunity to donate to the school, and they're worried that even if they would do that, that like nothing would really happen. It's just gonna get stolen. So that's what we want to fix with this business school. That it's going to be like an independent business school and really help all these people within Ukraine as well as these international partners and donors to invest in these initiatives and know that this is a lasting legacy we are building for the education and the rebuilding process in Ukraine. And right now, we're working with Ukrainian parliament to influence legislation, and we're working on passing this one law that will establish the framework for philanthropy as we see it, as like this 501c3 process. And because there are like a lot of like legal kind of like misunderstandings within Ukraine in the sphere of philanthropy, and that's what we are trying to fix with our initiative. So through my friends in Ukraine, we already like have a draft of this law on philanthropy. So we are kind of like building the framework for our future work and for the future of philanthropy in Ukraine.
So you'll be one of the leaders of the philanthropic movement in Ukraine. Future Via will.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, Future Via's future is what? What do you see Future Via doing in 5 years? Let's say the war has ended, and we're only speculating. We're not going to go down the road that Stanley's telling us not to go down. But let's just say the war has ended, and there is a modicum of peace and prosperity, if we can imagine that in Ukraine at that point. What will Future Via be doing at that point?
Yes, I do hope to be involved in Future Via even 10 years from now, because the issues that Ukrainian children and Ukrainian people are facing right now will have lasting consequences on many people in Ukraine. And like the sphere of education, all these schools will need to be rebuilt. The sphere of medicine, Ukraine will need to have continued support to develop like these new drugs, and like all of these projects are really long-term partnerships and projects for years to come. So I am going to be involved in that. But what I also hope to do is get more involved in Ukrainian parliament and become a Ukrainian politician to help resolve those issues more directly. But I will be involved in this nonprofit, and I hope to make this an official platform of the Ukrainian government. We want to stay independent of the Ukrainian government, but we want the government kind of like to mainstream and kind of like support this initiative, because like especially with support of Zelensky and other partners. And I do want to mention that I was invited by the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine to join one board and the Ukrainian government on the regulation of AI in Ukraine.
I have a question from the Zoom audience right now, and I think it's from Sandra. So Sandra, if you're able, can you ask it?
Sure. I just have a lot of questions about the education system pre-war and then what's available now. The first is pre-war, was there a nationalized curriculum?
Yeah, basically, and there were a lot of problems with that curriculum.
Okay. And was the language of instruction Ukrainian or Russian or regionally determined?
Yeah, there were some Ukrainian schools, but there were also some Russian-speaking schools as well.
And that's K through, that would be like kindergarten through 12th grade? I'm like
Well, Ukraine is actually to 11th grade right now, so.
11th grade.
There's 1 through 11 because Ukraine doesn't have officially the kindergarten, so it has like 1 through 11.
And what is internet connectivity and device availability like now?
Yeah. So, I mean, the internet is pretty fixed, but there are a lot of issues with the internet because, like, just like talking with people, there are kind of like been more issues. So it is kind of like getting fixed more and more, and that's kind of like why we want to deliver these Chromebooks to really give a lot of children this opportunity to continue learning, because like the infrastructure, like the schools aren't like a lot of them. The children can't even go into those schools, and a lot of schools aren't even destroyed. Like there are a lot of schools that are destroyed, but moreover, like a lot of schools are like completely fine, but they need like to have a bomb shelter, and if they don't have that, there couldn't be like anything going on in those schools. So that really disqualifies a lot of teachers and a lot of schools from giving instruction, and that results in a lot of people moving internally or being like international refugees. And like the Ukrainian schools on the western part of Ukraine can't really accommodate all these people. And so what we're trying to set up and working on setting up is kind of like an online school that would help children to learn from the comfort of their homes and get an official diploma.
And would you have the capacity to translate materials in English into the language of instruction within your organization?
Yeah, because we are going to be working with like OpenAI and BART AI to do this instruction, and we also have this cool initiative to do like AI tutors that will be available 24/7, responding to questions and kind of like speaking in the avatars of like famous people. Like we want to like train like the model. We will hire obviously people who are going to be programmers and who are going to train like the computer model. But basically, like for example, Bill Gates or like other people like are going to be kind of like as like these like live tutors available 24/7, and we want to do that to kind of like motivate students even further and inspire them. But we also are going to have like live teachers and going to follow the official curriculum with this platform. So we're not really changing the curriculum. We're just kind of like adding new features and easing the life. Like for example, grading is going to be done automatically. All the testing and a lot of homework, there's going to be more regulation into that, and also maybe more regulation as to like different teachers and different schools assign different stuff. And that's really going to help control the quality of education.
I want to ask.
English? Sorry, are they taught English?
Yeah, so there are like English language, but it's taught more as a foreign language because most Ukrainians still don't speak English. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask though, going back to Sandra's question, and this kind of follow up here too. You asked the question, Sandra, you heard Alex's response and you heard his comments about AI. Do you have any reaction to his comments about the use of AI?
Yeah, well, two things. First, I think my nonprofit organization has content to offer your nonprofit organization, so we should connect separate from this meeting. But secondly, yeah, the use of AI is complicated and in flux, and using the persona of another person. You see all these authors are now suing because their books have been fed to AI, and I don't know about people as avatars, so not sure about that. But I think it can be tricky without some quality control, obviously. And so I don't think you can just reasonably turn something over to AI. However, it can speed up the production of anything you're trying to do with that back-end quality control that you really need somebody, quite knowledgeable and skilled, and particularly when you're translating, if you're going to be translating content, to do checks on the translation. This is the bread and butter of a lot of the work that I do, and you can get yourself in trouble without those checks.
Yeah, so I think most of the content is going to be originally in Ukrainian, so we don't need to translate it. But I do get your concern about AI and the quality of education Ukrainian children are going to receive. So we're going to hire an independent board of Ukrainian teachers who are going to verify all these lessons and report and fix these issues within the program. Currently, we plan to use AI for as a live tutor and more of explaining questions, because a lot of children can't really ask these questions in class, or maybe even afraid to ask these questions in class. And so it's going to help with that. Also, it's going to help personalize education, because it's going to give out problems that are very personalized based on the student's performance. But also another thing that is coming through this is it's going to help with accessibility, because there's really very little work done for accessibility in Ukraine. And a lot of children where it's disabilities or special needs really don't have the infrastructure to learn, and AI is really going to be personalized to them and really going to help them a lot in the process.
We could talk a lot about AI, and there is much more there. And so far, excuse me, what you said is just touching the surface. And I'm hearing, though, that there's a positive use of AI, and I'm not feeling any big concerns on your part in its use. But we just have a couple of minutes left, and if anybody does have any questions, please get it in. But my last question to you is your own future. You alluded to this a moment ago, and I do want to ask you a little bit more in detail about what happens after Dartmouth. You plan on moving back to Ukraine? Is that your idea?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to be working full-time, and I'm already working full-time at my nonprofit. It's more of my hobby, and connected to a lot of things I'm doing, and I'm forming a lot of connections, and it is a lot of fun for me. But after I finish Dartmouth, I plan to join the Ukrainian parliament as a politician, as a member of parliament.
When you say join, don't you have to be elected?
You do have to be elected,
So
but
you have to
also
go find votes.
yeah, but there are also some parties that have lists. So if I get on that list, I can just become the member of parliament from a list.
Let the party hacks do the work for you?
Basically.
I see.
But also I can maybe establish a campaign and get some votings, because I'm from Kyiv, so I want to run from the Kyiv region.
So you will move back to Ukraine and then run, is that a paid job? I mean, does that work well paid, so you can make a living off of that and do that work full time?
Well, first of all, Ukrainian politicians, all of them are very wealthy, and they are doing a lot of stuff. Well, in terms of the funding resources and personal funds and stuff like that, this private equity company is basically a business that I'm going to be working full time in as a CEO. And obviously it's going to make a lot of revenue. And obviously this medical company is going to be a business as well. Even though it's going to be operating as an NGO, it's still is a business so we do have this philanthropic side of Future Beyond, but we are working on establishing maybe this as a separate legal entity. But it is going to be a business to help Ukraine and to help with rebuilding Ukraine. But it is going to generate a lot of revenue, because there are going to be hundreds of billions of dollars invested into Ukraine, and we want them to be invested into our private equity company.
I think everybody here in the room and on Zoom has learned a lot from you today, and I hope has a renewed sense of vigor and promise for the future. And on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we wish you the best of luck and fortune in the future.
Well, thank you so much, and it's really an honor to be here.
Thank you very much. I'm waiting for the recording.